Hello YouTube, Sandre here. This is going to be a response video to two very known YouTubers called Sargon of Akkad and Steven Crowder. Now, me and Sargon are on friendly terms. This is just going to be a respectful response to him and Steven Crowder, where I will simply, with facts, counter historical inaccuracies. If you expect this video to spark any kind of drama, then you are sadly mistaken. This will really just be a pretty boring video where I will simply just set the record straight on historical accuracy. Also, may I ask people to actually watch the entire video before they comment or dislike the video? Far too often, people just simply have a knee-jerk reaction to a title or feel the need to defend a YouTuber that they like. I'm gonna begin by responding to Steven Crowder regarding one of his articles called Myth Busted. Actually, yes, Hitler was a socialist liberal. And he shares here a so-called quote by Hitler, where he says, "We are socialists, enemies of the present capitalist economic system, with its exploitation of the economically weak, with its injustice in wages, with its immoral evaluation of individuals according to wealth and money instead of responsibility and achievement. And we are determined under all circumstances to abolish this system." There's just one little problem with this quote though. Hitler never wrote or uttered these words at all. They are the words of a early Nazi Party official, Gregor Strasser, and it was printed in 1926 in a pamphlet titled Thoughts About the Tasks of the Future. With this pamphlet, he wanted to appeal to the ultranationalist movement on both the left and the right. And this was when the Nazis were a very fringe political party, and they sought to have as big of a part of the German electorate as possible. To continue in his pamphlet, the spirit of our National Socialist idea has to overpower the spirit of liberalism and false democracy if there is to be a Third Reich at all. Deeply rooted in organic life, we have realized that false belief in the equality of man is the deadly threat to which liberalism destroys people and nation, culture and morals, violating the deepest levels of our being. We have to reject with fanatical zeal the frequent lie that people are basically equal and equal in regard to their influence in the state and their share to power. People are unequal. They are unequal from birth, become more unequal in life, and are therefore to be valued unequally in their positions in society and in state. Continuing now from a biography of Strasser. Just as Hitler may be said to have pioneered and consolidated a party in southern Germany, so much the same was true of Strasser in the north. Strasser's success there clearly identified him as the man next in importance to Hitler. The confrontation was most crucial in this period of National Socialism, for it encompassed basic matters of ideological orientation, organization, tactics, and possibly leadership. Strasser was the guiding spirit of the Northern faction, and he even puts his authority behind a draft socialist program of action as an alternative to the one endorsed by Hitler for the party in 1920, which was supposed to be immutable. Hitler did not support Strasser's ideas. In fact, Hitler found Strasser's flirtation with the labor movement to be so hideous that Strasser was assassinated by Hitler in 1934. The political unrest of 1920s Germany was very much potent, and there was violence on both sides. And Hitler only used the term socialism to borrow the rhetorical devices of the left, but he never ever adopted the ideological ones. This is discussed in a book called The Coming of the Third Reich. The National Socialists wanted to unite the two political camps of the left and right into which they argued the Jews had manipulated the German nation. The basis for this was the idea of race. This was light years removed from the class-based ideology of socialism. By presenting itself as a movement, National Socialism, like the labor movement, advertised its opposition to conventional politics and its intention to subvert and ultimately overthrow the system within which it was initially forced to work. By replacing class with race and the dictatorship of the proletariat with the dictatorship of the leader, Nazism reversed the usual terms of socialist ideology. Now I'm going to respond to Sargon of Akkad in particular in his idea that somehow the Nazis were in fact socialist, when they clearly were not. And what I'm going to talk about now, people, are historical facts. What the Nazis actually did. Now, if you actually look at the economic and social reforms of the Nazi Party during the Third Reich, you will find that they privatized their economy. They did not nationalize the economy, they privatized it. It is by definition not a socialist reform. Again, these are historical facts. In fact, there were record profits for capital owners during the Third Reich. And Hitler very much flirted with the capitalists, because he was a capitalist. Now I'm going to read an excerpt from a book called Hitler's Germany, Origins, Interpretations, and Legacies. As preparation for war replaced restoration of domestic prosperity as the chief economic goal of the regime, the government's interventionist and regulatory measures increased. Prices, salaries, wages, rent, and interest rates were subject to regulation, and the government retained firm control over credit policy, imports, exports, and foreign exchange. Banking and the credit system were especially subject to government controls, although no effort was made to nationalize private banks. The government also issued directives to industry on production and investment. Manufacturers, for instance, were directed to reinvest a proportion of their profits in plant expansion and government bonds. Although the Reich took on some of the features of a centrally planned economy, may I add, perfectly normal in a mixed economy, there was no effort to nationalize industry or otherwise tamper with private property rights except for the rights of Jews. Indeed, the corrupt industrial empire was exempted by special law from inheritance tax and reverted from a public corporation to a family holding in 1943. The expropriation of Jewish-owned businesses, on the other hand, was stepped up after the adoption of the four-year plan. Industrialists worked closely with the regime and exercised considerable influence over economic policy. Gustav Krupp von Bohlen und Halbach retained his leadership position in the Association of German Industry and headed the Adolf Hitler Spende, a special industrial fund for the Nazi Party. Most industrialists supported rearmament and expansion, which offered the prospect of increased demand for their products as well as a readier access to raw materials. The authority and interests of proprietors and managers were enhanced by the introduction of the leadership principle in all business by law in 1934. Employers assumed the title of enterprise leaders and became masters in their own houses to an even greater extent than had already been the case in the Weimar Republic. Under the leadership principle, executives were responsible only to their superiors, not to anyone below them in the hierarchy. All authority ultimately rested with the man at the top. Freed from the pressure of union demands and encouraged by the regime to form monopolistic cartels in order to eliminate market instability, industrialists saw their profits rise at an even higher rate than productivity, which also rose under the relentless discipline of the new work ethic. By 1939, overall profits of limited liability companies were 4 times greater than they had been in 1928. Industrial profits greatly outpaced wage and salary increases and the rise in the general standard of living. Whereas wages and salaries increased by 49% between 1933 and 1937, and farm income by 33%, profits in trade and industry rose by 88%. It's pretty clear by historical records that the Nazis did not implement any kind of economic socialism in the Nazi Reich. In the description you will also find documentation linked showing the historical record of the economic reforms of the Nazi Reich as well as in fascist Italy. The reason I have also linked Italy's economic reforms is because I want you to take a look at both and see the striking similarity. It's no coincidence that Hitler was buddy-buddy with Mussolini because economically they had the same goal. Neither were socialists, by any stretch of the imagination. I have also linked timelines of the Nazi Party and its rise to power, just to further prove the point that anyone who would in any way entertain the possibility that the Nazis were anything but fascists are fooling themselves. Now, looking into the actual history of the Third Reich, it becomes apparent to anyone with a brain that the only reason the Nazis called themselves National Socialists was to attract the working class vote. To increase its appeal to larger segments of the population, 1920, the same day as Hitler's Hofbrauhaus speech, the DAP changed its name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Here are some historical bullet points just to bring the point home that the National Socialists were only socialists in name. 2nd of May 1933, trade unions are abolished and their leaders are arrested. 20th of June 1933, Hitler makes an agreement with the Pope, who sees him as someone who can destroy communism. This agreement allows Hitler to take over political power in Germany as long as he leaves the Catholic Church alone. 30th of June 1934, Hitler has about 400 of SA members murdered on the belief that they are socialists. I hope now that this video will open the eyes of people who were under the false belief that the Nazis in any way were socialists. They were not. They privatized the economy, and they saw themselves as the mortal enemies of anyone who had any kind of socialist leanings whatsoever. It's clear that they used the term National Socialism as merely a ploy to gain public attention and win the votes of the working class. Working conditions did not improve under the Nazi rule, and the workers did not get a greater share of ownership. Private ownership increased during the Nazi Reich. It did not decrease, as it did in the Soviet Union, for instance. The Soviets actually did have a form of economic socialism. The Nazis did not. Although I'm sure that some people who watch this video will try and bring up another false quote by Hitler, just like Steven Crowder did. You can continue to do so. Point is, history speaks against you, period. Now thank you for watching this video. Bye.